Belarus stands today at a moment that feels deceptively quiet yet dangerously unstable, a country whose streets may look orderly but whose foundations are shaking beneath the surface. The external image of Belarus has long been built around discipline, control, and predictability. Government buildings in Minsk still fly the national flag, security forces remain visible, and official statements continue to project confidence. From the outside, the state appears intact, functioning, and firmly led, yet this exterior calm increasingly feels like a carefully maintained illusion. The strategic environment around Belarus is changing, and the most important shift is the gradual withdrawal of unwavering support from Russia. For years, Belarus relied on Moscow not only as an ally, but as a guarantor of regime survival. As that guarantee weakens, the entire structure begins to wobble. International observers notice fewer joint military displays, quieter diplomatic language, and an unusual restraint from the Kremlin when it comes to publicly defending Minsk. These subtle exterior signals point toward a much deeper crisis unfolding within the country. The exterior posture of Belarus has always been central to its survival strategy. Military parades, tightly controlled public events, and a strong presidential image were meant to send a clear message. The state is strong, united, and protected. Today, that message is losing credibility. The absence of loud, enthusiastic backing from Moscow changes how neighbors, rivals, and even domestic actors interpret Belarus's position. Border regions feel more exposed, regional influence appears diminished, and the confidence once projected through sheer alignment with Russia is noticeably weaker. The state still functions, but it does so without the same strategic weight. The exterior framework remains standing, but cracks are now visible to anyone who knows where to look. Inside the political and institutional core of Belarus, the situation is far more intense and complex, and this interior reality is where the true crisis lies. The internal workings of the regime are under extraordinary strain as loyalty, fear, and uncertainty collide. President Alexander Lukashenko has ruled Belarus for decades through a system that depends on personal authority, security force loyalty, and Russian backing. When one of these pillars weakens, pressure builds rapidly on the others. Inside ministries, intelligence agencies, and military commands, officials are forced to reassess assumptions that once felt permanent. The belief that Russia would always intervene decisively in defense of the Belarusian leadership is no longer absolute. This shift changes internal calculations in dangerous ways. The interior atmosphere of governance has become tense, suspicious, and increasingly defensive. Meetings focus less on long-term national development and more on immediate threats to regime stability. Officials spend more time monitoring each other, controlling information, and preparing contingency plans. The psychological pressure inside the system is immense. When power depends heavily on loyalty, even small doubts can have enormous consequences. A quiet hesitation from a senior officer, a delayed response from a regional administrator, or a cautious statement from a minister can signal deeper fractures. The interior of the state feels like a machine running under stress, still operating but producing heat, friction, and instability. Economic management inside Belarus further deepens the crisis. The Belarusian economy has long depended on favorable trade terms, energy subsidies, and financial support from Russia. As Moscow recalculates its priorities, those economic lifelines become less reliable. Inside economic ministries and state-owned enterprises, officials face the reality of tightening budgets, declining profitability, and growing public dissatisfaction. Inflation, stagnant wages, and limited opportunities strain social stability. Workers may not protest openly, but frustration accumulates quietly, spreading through families and communities. The interior social contract that once exchanged stability for obedience weakens when stability itself is no longer guaranteed. The performance of the Belarusian state under these conditions reveals the limits of its model. Performance is no longer defined by efficiency or progress, but by survival and control. Administrative responses slow down as uncertainty increases. Decision-making becomes centralized, rigid, and risk-averse. Instead of adapting creatively to new challenges, the system relies on familiar methods that worked in the past but may no longer be sufficient. The performance of leadership in moments of crisis is measured by clarity, confidence, and adaptability, and Belarus now struggles on all three fronts. Military performance remains disciplined on the surface, but confidence has been shaken by geopolitical realities. Belarusian forces are trained, organized, and experienced in internal security roles, yet their strategic effectiveness has always been tied to Russian coordination. When that coordination becomes uncertain, so does the overall deterrent posture. Soldiers may follow orders, but morale is influenced by belief in the mission and trust in leadership. Inside military ranks, questions inevitably arise about what would happen in a true national emergency without full Russian backing. Performance under uncertainty is far more fragile than performance under clear alliances. Information control and narrative management, once a strong point of the regime, also show signs of strain. The state still dominates traditional media, but alternative sources of information circulate quietly through digital channels and personal networks. Performance in controlling public perception becomes harder when economic reality contradicts official messaging. The gap between what people experience and what they are told widens, eroding credibility. Performance in this sense is not just about action but about belief, and belief is increasingly fragile. Safety features within Belarus have historically relied on a powerful security apparatus designed to prevent unrest and neutralize opposition quickly. These mechanisms include surveillance, policing, legal pressure, and rapid deployment of force when needed. On paper, these safety features remain intact. However, safety systems are only as effective as the morale and unity of those who operate them. As uncertainty about external support grows, so does internal hesitation. Officers and personnel may continue their duties, but the confidence that once came from knowing they were fully backed by both the state and its strongest ally is no longer absolute. Public safety becomes more complex when economic and political stress converge. The state's emphasis on order can suppress visible unrest, but it cannot eliminate underlying discontent. Safety features that rely heavily on fear and coercion face diminishing returns over time. Each act of repression carries a cost, increasing resentment and deepening divisions. When safety is enforced rather than earned, stability becomes brittle. The interior sense of security within society weakens, replaced by anxiety and quiet resistance. Border and national safety are also affected by the shifting geopolitical landscape. Belarus occupies a strategically sensitive position in Eastern Europe, and any perception of weakness invites pressure. Without strong external guarantees, national safety becomes a more pressing concern. The safety framework must now account for scenarios that were previously considered unlikely. This adds further stress to an already strained system. What once distinguished Belarus as a unique political entity were its unique selling points in regional politics. These included unwavering alignment with Russia, internal stability through strong centralized control, and a reputation for predictability. For Moscow, Belarus served as a reliable partner and strategic buffer. For the regime, this relationship provided legitimacy, security, and economic support. Today, these unique selling points are eroding. Alignment with Russia is no longer unconditional, stability is increasingly questioned, and predictability gives way to uncertainty. The uniqueness of the Belarusian model now works against it. A system built around one leader and one external patron struggles to adapt when that patron steps back. The lack of institutional flexibility, political pluralism, and economic diversification becomes a liability. What once seemed like strengths now appear as constraints. The The regime's inability to reinvent itself quickly limits its options in a rapidly changing environment. The price of this unfolding crisis is high and multifaceted. Politically, the cost is growing isolation and diminished authority for Lukashenko. Diplomatically, Belarus finds itself with fewer reliable partners and less leverage. Economically, the price is paid by ordinary citizens through declining living standards and limited prospects. Militarily, the cost is increased vulnerability and strategic uncertainty. Socially, the price is paid in fear, frustration, and loss of trust. The financial price of reduced Russian support is significant, but the psychological price may be even greater. Confidence, once lost, is difficult to restore. The belief that the system is permanent and unchallengeable was central to its stability. As that belief fades, so does the deterrent effect that kept opposition fragmented and cautious. The price of maintaining control rises as legitimacy declines. For Lukashenko personally, the cost is existential. His leadership has been defined by control, resilience, and survival against repeated challenges. Yet, this moment feels different because it is shaped not only by internal dissent, but by shifting external alliances. When Vladimir Putin recalculates priorities, it sends a clear message that loyalty has limits. The relationship between Minsk and Moscow has always been transactional, and transactions change when costs outweigh benefits. Inside Belarus, different scenarios are quietly debated. Some imagine a gradual tightening of control, others fear sudden instability, and a few hope for negotiated change. None of these paths are easy. Each carries risks and uncertainties. The regime's instinct is to double down on familiar methods, but familiar methods may no longer produce familiar results. The population watches carefully, weighing risks and possibilities. Many remember past protests and the heavy response that followed. Fear remains a powerful force, but it competes with fatigue and frustration. When people feel they have little left to lose, calculations change. The interior social mood becomes a critical variable in the unfolding crisis. Internationally, Belarus is increasingly viewed as a test case. Observers analyze whether a long-standing authoritarian system can survive without its primary patron. The outcome will influence how similar regimes are perceived and how alliances are valued. Belarus's trajectory matters not only for its own people, but for the broader balance of power in Eastern Europe. The performance of the regime in the coming months will depend on its ability to manage internal pressure, adapt economically, and navigate a more cautious relationship with Moscow. This is a delicate balancing act with little room for error. Overreaction could accelerate instability, while hesitation could invite challenges. The margin for safe decisions is narrowing. Safety features will be tested not only by potential unrest, but by internal loyalty. A security apparatus under strain can still function, but its effectiveness depends on unity and confidence. If cracks appear within these structures, the entire system becomes vulnerable. The leadership is acutely aware of this risk, which explains the intense focus on internal control. The unique selling point of Belarus as a stable, predictable ally is fading, and with it goes much of its strategic value. The country must now confront questions it long avoided. What happens when external support is conditional? How does a system built on permanence respond to uncertainty? These questions have no easy answers. The price of delay is also significant. Each day without adaptation increases pressure. Each unresolved problem compounds the next. Time, once an ally of the regime, may now be working against it. The longer uncertainty persists, the harder it becomes to restore confidence internally and externally. In conclusion, Belarus stands on the brink of a defining moment. The familiar structures remain, but their foundations are under strain. Putin's pullback of support signals a shift that cannot be ignored. Lukashenko's control, while still formidable, is no longer absolute. The future of Belarus will be shaped by how this crisis unfolds, whether through consolidation, transformation, or rupture. What is certain is that the old equilibrium has been broken. The path forward is uncertain, risky, and deeply consequential for Belarus and for the region as a whole.